In chapter 25 is where we meet Jacob when he's born. Years go on, and Esau comes back, the profane man, and he's hungry, and he's wiped out and tired, and Jacob's been out there making pottage. And Esau says, give me your pottage. And what does Jacob say? Sell me this day thy birthright. Now, fellows, that's the most ridiculous proposal anybody ever heard of. Your birthright. Because you came out first, you have the right to a bigger inheritance of our fathers. One of the most important things about your life, your birthright. Now, would you sell it to me for this bowl of pottage? Now, in that story, the one who is condemned in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, is Esau. The end of the story is, thus Esau despised his birthright. But we see in the story, Jacob's guile. Here's my chance. I'm at a disadvantage. Mother says God has chosen me, but my father favors Esau. Here's my chance. I know what Esau is like, a very selfish, immature, profane man. And he's coming in and he claims to be faint. He's about ready to just collapse. And so I'll say, sell me your birthright for this pottage. And you know what Esau reasons, if you call this reason, what good is my birthright if I die of starvation? Now, I don't really think the guy was dying of starvation. And thus he despised his birthright. But Jacob was living by his wits. Scheming. Guile. How do you and I face a difficult situation? Hey, don't worry. We got this under control. I know what we can do. We can tell them this instead of that. Or you know what? I can get close to him. And you know what? You watch. A couple phone calls, have that thing straightened out. By Guile. Then we come to chapter 27, and you know what's coming. Now is the blessing. This is a big thing. I've heard people talk about the blessing of the father, but this was a special blessing. It was the blessing of Abraham. Abraham, father of Isaac, grandfather of Esau and Jacob, had been given a blessing from God. This land of Canaan will one day belong to your family, who will be a nation. I will bless them that bless you, and curse him that curseth you. And in your seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. A messianic blessing. Wow, that's a big one. Goes beyond the birthright. And you know, it's time. Isaac is getting old. And the blessing will be pronounced. And Rebekah suspects that, contrary to the will of God, her husband was going to bless Esau instead of Jacob. Guile. Now, I want to ask you a question at this point in the story. Is God able? Is God able? Here's Abraham. And Sarah, his wife, says, look how old we are. We don't have any children. And our whole life is based on what God is going to do through our son, which we do not have. And it has ceased to be with me as with women. This is impossible. Take Hagar. I want to ask you again, is God able? Amen. See, at times like that, we choose whether it will be God or Guile. And so you remember the story. It was Rebekah's idea. And she says, disguise yourself. Your father's eyesight is not good at all. He's almost blind. And you know, Esau goes out to hunt and shoot a deer and make venison, bring it back to his father. His father, apparently a very sensual man, says, you know, if I could eat your meat, I could come up with a very eloquent blessing, because I'll just feel good for that venison. And so when he goes out, in comes Jacob, pretending to be Esau. And Jacob says, who are you? He says, I am Esau, thy firstborn. Genesis 27:19. A point blank lie. To his father. I heard a Christian man once say about a difficult situation. He was trying to get somebody out of trouble. He said, everybody lies to his father. And you know what? Maybe I'm a little naive, but I was shocked at that statement. He lied to his father. You know why? He was operating on guile. And later, in verse 24, Isaac says, "Art thou my very son, Esau?" And he said, "I am." And he pulls the trick. You remember that? And he gets this blessing from his father. But I want to ask you a question. Is God able? If Jacob and Rebekah had said, "Now, Lord, we don't know how you're going to do this. But you said, when my twins were born, that the younger one would be the one with the blessing, that the older one would serve the younger. Now, God, bring it to pass. Bring it to pass." They could have prevailed with God. But instead it became deceptive, scheming. Would you buy a used car from Jacob? Because they had learned to live by God. I know people who get to be adults, which almost all of you are, will come to the point where even if they're Christians, they think that's the way things work, brother. You got to face reality. You know, this is the world we live in. And you know, you got to use your wits. Got to have a little trick under your sleeve or whatever. Yeah, you do. Yeah, I'm going to tell you, there's two ways for a man to face the challenges of life. By guile or by God. Well, what happens? You know, God is in control and God is able. Well, you know what happens. Everybody thinks Isaac's going to die. And you know, I haven't figured out yet. Isaac didn't die for years. So Rebekah says, "Why don't you leave?" And she makes an excuse for Jacob to leave with the blessing of Isaac. He takes off because Esau has threatened to kill him. And he ends up running into a guy named Laban. Now, if Jacob was a trickster, he met the master trickster in his future father-in-law, Laban. I mean, talk about guile. Remember that morning? Honeymoon? It's Leah. Boy, you talk about being tricked, swindled. I worked for 7 years for Rachel. Whoa! Hey, Laban. We got to have a talk. He says, it's not our custom in this country to give the younger before the older. You go ahead and you're married now legally to Leah. And all you have to do, I'll give you Rachel right away. Also just work for me another 7 years. Now, I don't know how you read the Bible, but I read the Bible based on the reality and based on the way I live life. It seems to be like 14 years is a long time. And you read, here he is under master trickster Laban, changing his wages. And you know, after a while, it looks like Jacob is living a little more by faith. And he says, all right, I'll stay with you. Laban says, you're such a good worker. I love you, son. And I'd like you to work a little more than 14 years here. And then Jacob said, okay, we'll let God determine my wages. And it had to do with ring-straight, brown, spotted cattle. I still can't figure that chapter out, but you go back and read it. And you know, if the cattle is marked this way, it's mine. If it's marked that way, it'll be yours. And he trusts God, and God makes it so. Jacob becomes rich, and Laban becomes impoverished. Remember all that. And now here they are. He's still living by guile. And what God did was he worked him over. The trickster was tricked again, again, and again, and again. And you know what? He got a taste of his own medicine. Then in chapter 31, God said it's time to go back to Bethel. And you know what? He has come to the point in his life where God can get a hold of Jacob. God hadn't got a hold of him yet. When he left home and he met God there at the place called Bethel originally, he said, God, if you take care of me in this journey, if you preserve me from my brother Esau, well, then I'll come back to this very spot and offer an offering on this pillar, and you will be my God. Up to this point, Jacob did not identify his father's God as his God. something had to happen. Because up to this point, Jacob was facing all of his problems by scheming and plotting and manipulating and deceiving and lying. How about you? Now, Dr. Rice has really drawn a line between the flesh and the spirit. And you may not have gotten so you have deceived anyone or pulled the wool over their eyes or actually lied to anyone. But you know what? If our natural and immediate reaction to a big problem is guile. Guile. Pastors do this. Let's have a meeting. Let's do some damage control here. Let's, you know what? Why don't we just do what Jesus says to do and let the chips fall? I had a guy tell me he was in a church situation. He said, Brother Flanders, he said, it is awful hard. The man was a deacon. This is really hard. And I knew the situation. I looked him right in the eye and I said, no, it's not hard. Just do the right thing and let the chips fall. There are pastors who are tempted to manipulate. Or husbands. Oh man, wait till I get home. Oh, but wait a minute. She doesn't have to know that. You know, I could set this thing up a lot different. You know, even though we haven't gotten maybe to the point of absolute deception maybe, but I'm asking you this. Is your mode of operation basically guile? Guile. 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 I can make my way through this life by my wits. I have a scheme. I have a plan. Somebody may have come to the retreat with a plan. But I want to tell you something that's shocking, and that is, God's in control. And if you read Jacob's life up to this point, he runs into all kinds of dead ends because he's living by God. Now, living by God. We come into chapter where we were reading chapter 32. Matter of fact, why don't you look there again? I want to show you how the chapter opens up. God sent him back to Bethel. Jacob had a lot of wonderful things to say about God in chapter 31. He's grateful. God is moving him to a point of decision. I think that's true about some of us right here this morning. I mean, since last night, God has moved him. But you know what? There hasn't come that crisis, that breaking point. You know, I was thinking when Dr. Rice was preaching, you know what had to happen at this men's retreat? There ought to be men on their knees. There ought to be men praying, dear God, fill me with the Spirit. You know what? There ought to be groups of men on their knees, saying, dear God, when we go home, we want it to be different. We want you in charge of our life. We want to see your power. But I'm going to tell you, the crisis I'm talking about now, guile or God, is a big one that'll change a man's life. And you know what? Some of us are moved that direction, but we haven't come through the crisis yet, like Jacob. Look at verse 1. And Jacob went on his way, he's going to Bethel, and the angels of God met him. I don't know what happened here. I have an imagination. He looked up and what did he see? Beautiful, glowing angels going with him along the path of God's will for his life. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which means two hosts. But read the chapter. What does he do next? Here we have now the grand finale of Guile. You know, Jacob's going to give up Guile, but I tell you what, he's going to give her another big trial. He gets word. Esau's coming to meet us. Oh, and he's got 400 men with him.